Alright guys, so today we're talking about intonation on guitars, and I pretty much explained what it was in the previous video, so make sure you watch that. But in this video, I'm going to show you really the nitty-gritty about how do we adjust intonation. Alright? Now, in this particular video, I'm going to assume that we've already had the guitar set up for the height of the strings. In other words, it's playing the way we want it to play. So the neck is adjusted right, the truss rod's adjusted. If you haven't watched the video on truss rods yet, maybe stop the video here and go and check that one out so you understand what the truss rod adjustment is and what it does, as well as the height of the strings, which is basically just adjusting the height of each one of the strings with the saddle to make it play the way that you want to play it. So, or you want it to play. So the way that that is done, I guess I'll cover that here a little bit because I don't think I have an individual video on that. So how high these strings are is basically the action on the guitar, and that's how easy or difficult it is to push the string down by how much distance we have to cover. And the way that that's adjusted on a Stratocaster is we have each one of these saddles has 2 points that we can adjust for height. And what we do is we adjust those up and down while measuring with a scale. I have a scale here that actually shows millimeters and the English scale as well, 64s, but I really use the millimeters. It's easier to set. I set that scale right on top of the 12th fret, and then I can move that string on top of it. Sometimes you need to touch the neighboring string just to get out of your way. And I really adjust this so that string is, on my first string, I usually have it close to 2 millimeters. I like the strings up a little bit so I can hit them harder. Sometimes you go 1.5 millimeters, but I would never go lower than that. And then on the 6th string, we adjust that string so it's about 2 to 2.5 millimeters high, and that's again from the top of the 12th fret to the bottom of the string as measured on the scale here. So don't do it by just eyeballing it, because when you look at the guitar, your eye is going to see the side of the wood. It's not really going to be following the top of the frets, and that's where we measure action from, the top of the frets, not the side of the wood. So when I have this properly adjusted and I look down at it, it looks like it's really high, because on the Stevie Ray Vaughan Strat, it has big frets, which means that those frets come up way off the fingerboard, and we're measuring from the top of the fret. So then when you look at this edge of the fingerboard, when you look at it, it looks like the strings are way higher than they are. So make sure that you pick up a steel scale if you're going to do this on your own, and you're going to adjust each string accordingly. So let's say that the first string is at 2 millimeters and the 6th string is at 2.5, then you'll want to just kind of graduate as you go across the fingerboard. Maybe adjust the 2nd string just like the first 2 millimeters, then a hair above 2 millimeters on the 3rd string, a little bit higher on the 4, a little bit higher on the 5, almost matching the 6th string. So it's kind of got a curve to it. It gets a little bit higher as it goes across to the heavy strings, which is really what you want, because a heavy string is bigger, it's heavier, it's usually a little bit looser. So when you hit it, it needs more room to travel. So you need just a hair more height. So that really has to do with setting up the action on your guitar and how high each string is. Now once we have that adjusted, which of course, you know, truss rod first, make sure that's adjusted the way you want it. A little bit of forward bow is the way I like it to be. And I measure that just by basically touching the 1st fret, hold it down on the 6th string, and then the fret that the neck touches the body, and then I'll reach out with my middle finger and just push down that string. And I want to see about 1/3 of the diameter of that 6th string movement. So I've got a little bit of forward bow. That gives the strings a little bit more room to move. Some guys like it perfectly straight. I just don't care for it perfectly straight. When I bend, I like to be able to get in there and grab that string and have it not slip out from under my fingers. So that's truss rod adjustment is done properly, the height of each string is done properly, and now we're going to talk about the intonation, which is really what this video is about today, and that's how long each string is going to be. So we'll move the camera, get it in here on a clear shot so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to demo this on the Strat. I'm going to show you a typical Telecaster setup, as well as we'll have a Les Paul, and then we'll talk a little bit about acoustic guitars at the end, and is that adjustable at all? Coming right up. Alright guys, so today we're going to be adjusting the intonation on our Stratocaster. Check the timestamps below. We will also have a Telecaster being covered, a Les Paul style bridge being covered, as well as talking about an acoustic, so you can jump to whichever one's appropriate for your guitar. Alright, so what we're doing here is we're going to be adjusting the length of the string by adjusting the saddle here on the Stratocaster. It's adjusted by a screw back here at the back of the bridge, and that will affect the length. I can either pull the saddle back or make it go forward. We also have the guitar hooked up to our tuner here. I like a tuner for adjusting intonation. I like a tuner with a very fine-tuned needle on there. You can get some tuners that would have that adjustment that would be digital. I don't know that I would try to adjust intonation with one of the tuners that clips on the headstock, like a Snark or something like that. They're great tuners, but for fine-tuning the guitar, probably not the way to go. Now you'll notice I am holding the guitar upright in playing position, and this is the way that you should adjust it. You do not want to adjust it laying flat, because it, believe it or not, it changes it a little bit. So have it in playing position, and we're going to play the open string, and we'll adjust that to being in tune. This is going to be on an E, so we're going to tune it straight up and down for E, right in the middle there. It's a very sensitive adjustment on this particular tuner. I'm hitting it about once per second until it's in tune at E, and then we'll play the 12th fret. And you'll notice that I'm to the right there in the meter, and what that means is this particular string is too long. It's too short, actually. It's too short, and I need to make it longer. So I'm going to adjust this with a small tip Phillips screwdriver. Just come back here. If you're afraid to scratch the top of your guitar, you might want to lay maybe a paper towel across it or something like that. But I just use my fingers as a guide, and I'm going to basically screw this in to pull that adjustment back. I'm actually moving the saddle back towards the butt end of the guitar. So I moved a little bit. We'll need to retune. So we go flat and then back up to the E. Till it's an adjustment. Play at the 12th fret again. And then you will see now it's playing in tune. It's straight up and down when I fret it. Now, a couple things. You want to use the fingerboard pressure, in other words, what you're pushing down with your fingertips. You want that to be about what you're going to be doing when you are playing live or you're playing. Don't push too hard, because if you push too hard with these big frets, I can make it sharp. I'm really pushing it down now. It's actually stretching the string. So we want just the, light tension. Don't play lighter than you usually play, but right there in the middle, just where you would normally play on your fingertip pressure. And that's how you want to adjust each one of these. And that's probably the biggest reason that you should set intonation yourself, because when you have the guy at the shop do it, he's not using your hand or your finger pressure. So to really zero it in, you're going to want to use your hand and adjust it yourself with whatever strings that you're used to using. Again, make sure that your guitar is actually adjusted for height and for truss rod adjustment before you try setting the intonation. Otherwise, when you change those things, it will have an effect on the intonation. So what we just did there, we would do for each one of the 6 strings, adjusting them per length. I go through them twice, and then I play a little bit. I'll play some chords, maybe play down here, play a D, bring it up above the 12th fret, and see how in tune it actually sounds. If the intonation is correct, it will sound in tune. Again, make sure to use equal fingerboard pressure with your fingertips. And this is how you would adjust a Stratocaster. You just do it 6 times in a row, and that will do it. Next up is going to be a Telecaster, and I'll show you how that's different. Okay guys, so now we're adjusting the intonation on a Telecaster guitar. I already showed you a Stratocaster. The order of the day is the same thing. Longer strings when the guitar is playing too sharp, and shorter strings when it's playing too flat. The difference here on a Telecaster, and this is set up like an old style Telecaster, is it has 3 barrel saddles. That means that each one of my saddles affects 2 strings, not 1. So on the Stratocaster, I could adjust all 6. I can still adjust 6 of them here, but every time I adjust the first string, I'm also affecting the second string, and so forth with the 3 and the 4, or the 5 and the 6. Now, a vintage Telecaster, where this is a straight barrel saddle and it doesn't have anything in it to accommodate intonation, means that you can't really adjust that perfectly in tune, because it's straight, and those 2 strings don't need to be the same length. They need to be different. This particular saddle that I have here, while it looks like a vintage saddle, is it has grooves carved into it to allow my first string to leave about a 1/16 of an inch or a little bit more ahead of my second string. And this is a really cool set, because it looks vintage, but it really works to bring your guitar more in tune. You can actually set the intonation with it. So they're made by several different companies and several different looks. Another one that you might find is where they actually have the screw hole going through the barrel where it's at an angle. So while the screw is straight, the saddle would be angled. And that's a good way to do it too. They'll look really crooked, and that's another way to accomplish the same thing. But I would recommend on your Telecaster, for really good intonation, you're going to want something that accommodates allowing the first string and the second string to jump off of that or leave that saddle post at different positions so you can adjust them individually. All right, so what we've got here is to adjust it, you have to do the same thing we did with the Stratocaster. You will use a small tip Phillips screwdriver. Notice that because of the vintage style bridge, this screw is at pretty steep of an angle. It's actually coming down about like this on the top of my guitar. So I have to watch what I'm doing when I'm back here and trying to grab that and don't really scratch the top of your guitar. If you have a guitar that you really worry about scratching. This particular one's been adjusted, so when I play the open first string, it's E, and then when I play the 12th fret, it's straight up and down E. And you'll want to adjust that so each one of these 6 strings plays open and then plays at the 12th fret in tune. Now, sometimes you'll see people where they will play a harmonic, which is where they're just playing a harmonic above on the string, you're not fretting the string at all. But to me, I don't play harmonics that much. I really am going to be fretting notes almost everywhere, and I really want to do the comparison between an open string and a fretted note. So that's a little bit different, but I think that really accomplishes what we need to accomplish. It's going to play in tune when I fret it. Harmonics, they're always going to play in tune. So, I mean, they're not dependent. If the string's in tune with an open note, it's going to be in tune on the harmonics. So that's the way I do it. So again, you would just adjust each one of these saddle posts. Now, notice on this, when I adjust the first screw here, I'm adjusting not only the first string but the second string. So I would bounce back and forth. I adjust it to the first string's in tune. Let me check to make sure the second string's in tune. If you have one of these saddles that accommodates intonation, it will work perfectly. If you've got the vintage style, you're going to find that, well, one's going to be sharp and the other's going to be a little bit flat, and that's just what you're going to have to live with if you're playing a straight type of design on the bridge like the original 50s Teles. All right, so next up I'm going to show you what a Gibson style bridge looks like to accomplish the same thing. All right, guys, so now we're looking at a Gibson style instrument. It could be an SG, an Explorer, a Flying V, a Les Paul. All of them are going to have really the same type of an arrangement where you're going to have a stop bar tailpiece and you're going to have a bridge here. Each one of these saddles are adjustable. They're adjusted slightly differently than on the Strat and the Tele. And this time we're going to use a small flat blade screwdriver, and instead of coming from behind, if it's set up like a true vintage Gibson, you're going to come from this direction. You're going to have to reach over the pickup. Sometimes you'll need to lower the pickup a little bit, but you're going to reach over here, get into the slot, and you'll be turning that either right or left. If you turn it right, you're actually going to be screwing it in, which would then bring the saddle towards the neck. If you're turning it counterclockwise, you're actually pushing the saddle back. Now, a lot of Gibsons, you have to watch because a lot of times it's very difficult to get all the strings in tune with where they put the bridge. Sometimes they put the bridge in the wrong spot, so you really have to kind of work with that. String gauges, string height, and things like that. But basically we're doing the same thing. We're going to make the string longer if it's playing sharp, and we're going to make it shorter if it's playing flat. So we just plug in our tuner here, this one right on top of the guitar. I'm on the bridge pickup. I'll pick it up. I'm going to play the open first string, adjust that up to E, and really make sure all the strings are in tune before you start this process. You have the open one as E, I fret the 12th fret, E, and you'll see that it's sharp. So that tells me that this particular guitar, that string is too short, so we need to make it longer. So the way we adjust it, again, we get in here, it's kind of hard to engage these saddle pieces, and I'm just going to turn it. You can see that saddle moving. It doesn't move very quickly. So I turned that about a turn and a half, and I will retune it. Stretch it a little bit, retune to E. See, it got a little sharp there, became a little sharp. All right, E, and it's still sharp. So I would continue to adjust this back until it is tuned correctly. Let's see if we can get this one. You'll notice that at this point I'm about midway through the adjustment on this particular guitar. You can get wider. This is like a vintage style bridge, ABR, which is very, very narrow. You can get a Nashville, which is wider and gives you a little bit wider of a string adjustment. I know a lot of people like the original vintage type, but I know that, for example, Gary Richrath, he played original 50s Les Pauls, and he would actually install Nashville bridges to accommodate more intonation adjustment. There we go. So it should be about the same. Again, use the appropriate finger pressure. Just a little sharp. And you can hear that. You can hear that when you're comparing those two E notes, one is just a hair sharp. So we back this up. Adjust again, just pull it up. Almost perfect. Again, you want to make sure that your setup is exactly the way you like it. There we go. Perfect. So we're going to do that for each one of the 6 strings. Before you adjust the intonation, it's the last thing you do. First thing you do is put your new set of strings on, adjust your truss rod, adjust the height of your strings. After you complete those 3 things, the final thing will be setting the intonation. Play it for a few minutes, check the intonation again. Once you've done that, you're set. You always buy the same set of strings. It's going to work really well for you. Now, if you want to try a new set of strings, before you go through the process of adjusting everything, put your new strings on there, play them for a couple days. Do I like them? If you like them, you like the new set, go ahead and have it set up for that. They'll need to adjust the intonation a little bit for a different set of strings, brand, manufacturer, gauge, all that. And then you'll be back to 0 once you have that adjusted. All right, so next up we're going to talk a little bit about an acoustic guitar. It's not really adjustable like these guitars are. I can also tell you, if you're just looking here, you see how far back I have that first string. That means I can just tell you by looking at it, the second string and the third string are going to have to come back, as well as probably these 3 strings. So everything's going to move back towards the tailpiece because they were just too far forward. All right, next up's acoustic guitar. All right, guys, so finally we're looking at an acoustic guitar here, which does not have mechanical adjustment on the string length. Part of it is built into the guitar. You'll notice that the saddle, which is this white piece here, is at an angle because the manufacturer knows that the 6th string will need to be longer than the 1st string. So it's at an angle, but that would still put it in a straight line, and they're not really supposed to be in a straight line, at least the saddle piece is where each string leaves the saddle. So if you look closely, this is a Martin guitar, and what they've done is they have actually carved this saddle back. So the 1st string is shorter than the 2nd string. 2nd string passes the saddle back here because of the carve, and then they do an opposite carve on this side where they try to make them be a little bit more stair-stepped. In addition to that, you will notice that an acoustic guitar will have a wound 3rd string. So instead of it stepping back further than the 2nd, in other words being longer than the 2nd, it's actually much shorter than the 2nd string, and that's because it's a wound string and it needs to intonate further forward. So this is something that's built in at the manufacturer. You can affect it in a number of different ways. One, how tall that saddle is affects how it's going to play and if it's going to play in tune or not. So you can have that adjusted for height, as well as a luthier will actually get in there and carve that saddle to make it play as in tune as possible. It's not quite as adjustable as electric guitars are, but because the strings are heavier, they tend to stretch a little bit less. So overall, you can get the acoustic guitar to play in tune pretty well. This is not something I would have a regular player do, because getting out your carving knives and carving up your saddle, it's a pretty exacting. You can't add the saddle back, you know, if you carve too much off. So I'd have a luthier do this. Find you a shop that specializes in acoustic guitars or sells a lot of acoustic guitars, and have them look at it if you think that the action is bad or the intonation is bad. But overall, it is adjustable, just adjustable by someone who's a little bit better at a pro. You really need to see a pro for this. All right, guys, so now we've covered the acoustic guitar, the Stratocaster guitar, the Telecaster guitar, and Gibson style guitars, covering Les Pauls, Explorers, Flying Vs, and SGs, all those. Anything that would have that type of a bridge on it, the trapeze type bridge. Not really trapeze, that's a dual tailpiece and saddle type bridge. We've covered all those. Also, some Telecasters might have adjustment like the Stratocaster, in which case, if they do have, just follow the Stratocaster video. It would adjust exactly the same way. All right, this should make your guitar play a lot more in tune, and you get a lot more enjoyment out of it. If you don't feel up to the challenge of adjusting it yourself, just go ahead and take it to the shop, and the guys at the shop will be more than happy to do the complete setup for you and adjust the intonation. Just make sure you choose what type of string you want on it, and that way every time you buy your favorite string, it's going to bring it back to 0. I hope you enjoyed this video. Comments in the section below. I'm Trent. See you next time from the studio.